and welcome to today's webcast on technology and student success, meeting everyone's needs. Joining me today is a fellow reporter, Sarah Weissman, who will be answering some of your questions and commenting on some of the slides. We're glad to have her here. We are going to have lots of time for your questions and comments. So please, if you have a question, please put it in the Q&A box on the screen. You'll only see questions you have written, but Sarah and I will read the questions as we answer them. And before we start, I want to thank T-Mobile in Education for sponsoring today's webcast and for their support of the booklet that it's for their support for this webcast. And there's Sarah's and my contact information. Please feel free to ask us anything in higher education that you want to know. We're happy to answer questions. So first, there's the question of, well, what technology device do most low-income students have? Because that's a very important question in thinking about technology and low-income students. And the reality is they've got a phone. Maybe not that one, but they've got a phone. But for many, if not most low-income students, particularly very low-income students, that may be their only device. During the pandemic, many colleges tried to help with the situation by giving out laptops, and that's great. But at core, we are talking about a population without much access to technology. So if you're thinking about teaching with technology or monitoring students with technology, and you're thinking about, what's the latest at MIT or someplace, you're not going to get that here because we're talking about low-income students who don't have that technology. And that's so important to remember when you're thinking about these issues. What's missing for these students? Well, they don't have necessarily a private place to study. Many of these students don't live in dormitories, so they're living at home, many of them with families, and that doesn't lend itself to a great place to study. Many of these students also lack high-speed internet access, at least when they are off campus. As a result of these conditions, many colleges during the pandemic kept their Wi-Fi on in the parking lots, and students came to campus to do their homework, basically. On many community colleges were doing this, and the student had to drive in. Of course, many don't have cars, and work in the campus parking lot. That's that story sort of I don't always react the same way when I hear that story, because on the one hand, it's incredibly inspiring to think about these students doing that and wanting so badly to keep up and to have access to their internet service. On the other hand, it's tremendously depressing to think about that as the only way for students to study. And yet it was for many of them. And many campuses, of course, they have public transportation instead of a parking lot. In those cases, some campuses did the same, keeping their campus open. So what are you supposed to do with all this information? One is to just remember that your students don't have a laptop just because you do. They don't necessarily have a computer just because you do. And that goes into the discussions on campuses about maintaining a network of good computers that is accessible to students, either to take home or to work on themselves. And it's also really important to think about how you teach and what you expect students to have with technology. Again, many people just think, well, I couldn't learn on a phone, but many students are. And it's important to just put that attitude sort of to get rid of it, even if you think, as I do, frankly, that it's not the best tool to do everything on. For many students, it is the tool, and that's what they are using. So it's a matter of perspective for your students. Now I want to talk about demographic changes that we are experiencing. And these are very important. A majority of high school graduates either are or will soon be non-white. A growing number of high school graduates are low-income students from low-income families. And in general, students have lower graduation rates than other students. The bottom line for this slide is that there are two reasons for colleges to really focus on low-income students. One is because it's the right thing to do, and unquestionably it is the right thing to do. The other is because they have to. Many colleges are used to having a certain number of students from the local schools who they take, and these students are just in worse shape than previous generations. Sarah, did you want to jump in now?
Yeah, thank you so much, Scott. Just to bolster what you're saying, I wanted to bring up a story that I wrote with my colleague Liam Knox about the enrollment landscape this fall. And something we heard over and over again from campus leaders was that they know that their enrollment can't only rely on sort of their bread and butter student for years and years, that there are these demographic shifts happening, particularly for white, middle, and upper income 18-year-olds, high school graduates. And they know, not only is it part of their educational mission to sort of broaden who they're educating, but they're going to need low-income students, first-generation students, adult learners, to really to stave off enrollment declines and really for their survival. And one quote that stood out to me was from Daniel Greenstein, the chancellor of the Pennsylvania State System of Higher Education, who told us, quote, "There's no way to fill that gap on the back of what I'm going to call traditional students high school age. There's no way to fill that gap on the back of students who can afford the relatively high priced higher education. You've got to figure out a way to open the aperture." And I think in addition to opening the aperture, I think campus leaders are really realizing that they have to be able to retain these students, and that's going to take supports that are different from what it took to retain sort of the traditional 18-year-olds coming into college. They're thinking about online classes, flexible courses, nighttime hours, and things that working adults would need.
Thanks, that's absolutely correct. Now I want to talk about, I want to switch the slide to graduation rates. For four-year colleges, the 8-year graduation rate midpoint is 57%. For two-year colleges, the 8-year graduation rate midpoint is 30%. This is and in themselves, that's a huge variation. But there is also variation within four-year and two-year colleges. Among the so-called best four-year colleges that you've all heard of, they have graduation rates, in the 90%, and many of them have them not just for 8 years, but for earlier, for 4 years or for 5 years. But that means that they're obviously lower. They're places with lower rates. For 2 years as well, the graduation rate really varies. And this raises an important question: how do you judge graduation rates? Too often, I think the only way people hear about them when they come out every year, and some local newspaper will say, well, here's all the graduation rates in our neighborhood, and that seems good, but they tend to mix different kinds of institutions. A private residential college with a public two-year college. It's not that the two-year colleges don't want to go up in their graduation rates. They very much do. but to compare them just because they happen to be near one another sort of misses the point, I think, of what the graduation rates are trying to convey and what they're really about. Next, I want to talk about narrowing the gap. And this relates to a really interesting study that was out from Titan Partners that looked at why some institutions with large populations of minority and low-income students had higher completion and graduation rates than did others. And so the first thing to remember is they, in fact, do have vastly different rates, even serving low-income population. You can do better. And what they found is they looked at the characteristics around the colleges that had low differences between their minority and white students, and found, well, one, their advisors spend a lot more time with students, and by definition, then the advisor's course load is lower. Doesn't mean they're not working as hard. In fact, they're working quite hard, but they've got the same student to spend more time with and to find out what is going on. They also are able to have greater use of technology through a variety of means, but this is about having the tech ready and available to their students, knowing what the students want in technology. And they have more access to data about the students so that they can tell, so-and-so is doing well, so-and-so is not doing well. Many times, narrowing the gap, to me, is about knowing your students and truly knowing, what they're going to do and, how they're going to do it, just from seeing that. Next, I want to talk about Black students at community colleges. If the previous slide was meant to sort of give you a you go get them, you can succeed, this one's rather depressing, frankly. It's about a story that we ran recently about a 44% decline in Black enrollment at community colleges from 2010 to 2020. 44%. Just think about that for a minute. That is huge decline, from 1.2 million to 670,000. And that is at community colleges, which, remember, community colleges serve four-year institutions when they graduate every year, and more students can enroll. The graduation rates between Black and white students doubled in the difference of the rates, and it was the white students who are graduating at higher rates. And very few of the Black students transferred. This story just was so depressing to me, although it was well written, because this is the story of what we are dealing with today in society. Sarah, did you want to add here?
Yeah, I'll quickly jump in. I mean, the numbers in that report really were staggering and disheartening. And I think especially for Black men at community colleges, I think for Black community college students in general, from fall 2019 to fall 2021, their enrollment dropped 18%. That was more than 23% for Black men at community colleges. And to college's credit, I think they really have been paying attention to this population and realizing that they need to, not only recruit, but retain these students. And a story that comes to mind is I wrote about Compton College. They used COVID-19 relief funding to sort of pay for a couple of years of a position that's dedicated to Black men's academic success and ensuring that they stay and they graduate. And that was after the president noticed that there had been an almost, I think, 28% decline in Black men at the college over the pandemic.
Yeah, I mean, they're just, these stories are all over the place. And this one was looking at the trends overall. But when you think about those numbers, they suggest there are a lot of places experiencing real trouble. Next, I want to talk about a very different population, the University of Wyoming, where they are working. They've got a new program designed to help rural students. There are rural students throughout Wyoming, and rural students experience some of the same levels of not necessarily feeling wanted, not necessarily being well prepared, as other students. This is in a state like Wyoming is an obvious priority for them to focus on. So what they're doing two things. One, they've got 2,000 students at rural high schools enrolled in college prep courses, which makes perfect sense because they can prepare for college. The other thing they're doing is bringing the students to campus to see it, to experiencing it, so that the students themselves know what the campus is like. Sarah, did you want to add here?
Yeah, I think one of the interesting things about talking to people at the University of Wyoming who are working on this project and others who sort of focus on rural students was, these students have sort of a host of kind of the barriers you would expect. Unfortunately, high rates of poverty, spotty internet access, trouble with transportation to campuses that can be miles away. Many are first generation. But I also heard over and over that there are also sort of psychological barriers that rural students in particular, like a lot of students these days, are sort of questioning the return on investment of college, that they're looking at sort of the limited jobs in their towns and don't necessarily know how a college degree or credential leads to one of those jobs. And also sort of in an era of political polarization, people were telling me that there's sort of a distrust in more conservative leaning rural communities of campuses as sort of seeing them as sort of places of liberal ideals. So something this program, and I think a lot of other programs that work with rural students are trying to do, is kind of build up that trust with institutions.
This program is just starting, I believe, and so we'll be watching to see how they do in the future. Now, this is a really interesting story about chatbots, because many associate text messaging and chatting with leisure activity of your students. And obviously many texts are leisure activities, but Georgia State did a big study of students, community college students, and they found that to have an artificial intelligence bot target these students with specific messages about how, what they want the students to do to get done, has a powerful impact. And the students are much more likely to do what they are asked and to stay. And this is important because so many colleges for years have complained about students ignoring their messages. They complained about that when they were sending them messages by snail mail. They complained about it when it was email. And many students consider email something for their parents to do, not for themselves. And these chat messages are very important to them, and they appear to follow them. Sarah, what did you find on that?
Yeah, this story was really interesting, and I think a theme that kept coming up was with nudging, sending these messages to students to remind them to do things. It really matters how you do it. Students are so inundated with messages and media that these chatbots kind of need to be used very strategically and sparingly, and to get them to do really specific tasks. And something that people were telling me about the chatbot in the Georgia State study was that it was very careful to sort of avoid bureaucratic language. So instead of saying FAFSA verification, it would explain what FAFSA verification is. It would address the student personally. And apparently those like little details really make a big difference. And the only other thing I was going to add is I also reported a story about Northern Essex Community College, which is a Hispanic serving institution. And they came out with a bilingual chatbot to sort of answer students' questions about enrollment. And I think the interesting thing about that was it was intended to help students, but also really to kind of get their families involved and give, Spanish-speaking families sort of an avenue to get their questions answered. So there's some interesting, innovative things happening in this space.
That's great. Then another area that I wanted to talk about dealt with some of the students who have dropped out of colleges. And it's really important to not view these students as failures. Many of them dropped out because they had one or more things that they just couldn't handle. Financial, family, not necessarily anything having to do with the community college experience itself. And so student success coaches last year contacted 27,000 students who had dropped out of 25 colleges and universities, and they re-enrolled 3,000 of those students. Many of them were fairly far along in their education, and the hope is that they will get those students through to graduation. And this is just an example of you really got to think about everyone, including the students who left. Sarah?
Yeah, I just wanted to add that this is just a huge population with so much potential. I think the National Clearinghouse Research Center found that there were about 39 million Americans who had some college credits, but no degree or credential. And re-enrollment initiatives aren't new. I know Morgan State had its reclamation initiative in 2016, where it promised sort of hefty scholarships to students and one-on-one advising through enrollment if they graduated in 6 years. But I think there's really been an uptick in these kinds of efforts. I did a lot of stories during the pandemic, focusing on community college enrollment. And definitely heard from them that they were, having faculty, staff, all hands on deck, calling students who stopped out and hadn't returned. So there's really been a lot of commitment to this issue.
Definitely there has. I'd like to remind you, you can ask a question at any time. We have just a few more slides before we turn to our questions. We've got some good questions in, but we want more. So please feel free to ask a question. What do these solutions have in common that we talked about? They are inclusive solutions. They are solutions that want to reach everybody, but they're customized for certain populations. The people who were trying to reach students who dropped out, or students who were formerly at a community college, students who are going to hopefully go to the University of Wyoming. These are specific students. And in general, while the programs are all inclusive, they were customized for certain populations. That's so important to do. These programs also all focus on graduation, getting somebody at a college for a long enough time that they can graduate. That is so important, just to drum home that idea over and over and over again. And they cost some money. Many of these programs have benefited from support from foundations and charities and others, and that's wonderful. But ultimately, they also cost some money and some time at the college or university that's doing them. And that is also so important to remember as you are starting a program. It's not just about thinking, oh, well, what could help students, although any number of things will help students. It's really about focusing in on why a given program. Like on the chat bots, well, that reflects the research that most students do have a phone. And the text instead of an email reflects the research that students are more likely to pay attention to a text than an email. It's about knowing your students so that they get the attention they need, and just being willing to spend some or find money for them. We're going to turn to the Q&A now. I again want to thank T-Mobile for Education for their support of this webcast, and we're gonna send you the recording of the webcast. But Sarah, is there a first question you'd like to answer?
Yeah, somebody asked, there are a lot of good questions in the chat here, but someone asked, what are some of the causes of the drop in enrollment? And there are so many. I feel like it depends to some part on the type of student you're talking about. For low-income students, I think the loss of service industry jobs during the pandemic hit them financially. Many had to work, which we know can be an obstacle to enrollment. I think for working adults and student parents, it was really hard to balance their work responsibilities and their child care responsibilities with college attendance. And also students were just burnt out. For some, taking online courses was really helpful and made their schedules more flexible. And for some, I think it was really not their preferred mode of learning, and they would rather take a gap year or wait till in-person classes were up and running again.
That's definitely true. Here's a question. I definitely agree that knowing your students and their needs is key to closing the digital gap. But the bitter irony is that knowing your students is harder at underfunded schools with bloated classes and few faculty, precisely where the need is greatest. Is there a way to overcome this? Well, I mean, the question is absolutely right. That the conditions don't lend themselves to the best solutions. And I would also say that many of the faculty at those institutions are among the most devoted faculty to work in higher education. So it's not that they aren't aware of these issues and aren't working on these issues. And I think the solutions will be the things that we talked about here. Some, selective use of technology can help if it's geared towards technology that the students have, both in teaching and also in tracking students. There's a lot of research that, a nudge can make a big difference in keeping a student enrolled in college who might have dropped out otherwise. But frankly, ultimately, I think this is a problem that is frequently turns back to those faculty who teach there, to those administrators who work there. They have to do more, unfortunately, to reach students. I think there's good evidence that doing the right things here does lead to lead students to succeed. Students can succeed, but it's going to take time and be difficult. Sarah?
Yeah, I mean, to your point and to the question asker's point, you need resources to provide supports and to really do that kind of deep dive into who students are and to disaggregate your data and do all the things that you need to do. I think it was a report from the Center for American Progress that found that there was, I think, a $78 billion revenue gap between the 2-year sector and the 4-year sector. And I think an $8,800 revenue gap per student between the two sectors. And that's a lot of money, and community colleges are serving students with the highest needs, especially when it comes to not just technology, but basic needs and security, the very basics for persistence, which are, food and a roof over your head. So, I completely understand sort of the maybe frustration inherent in this question, and there's sort of a policy piece to this too.
Do you have a question, Sarah?
Yeah, somebody else asked about what are your thoughts on professors' impact on helping rural students? And I'll just add a quick thought there. I think when it comes to that trust piece that came up in the University of Wyoming story, I think that's where faculty can be really helpful in just building really strong relationships with rural students and being the ones on the ground to sort of assess what their needs are. Sometimes faculty are sort of the best position to talk to students about what might be preventing them from staying enrolled or from academically succeeding.
Here's another question. What critical skills other than academic subject knowledge can K-12 schools provide to low-income minority students to gear them for more post-secondary success? Well, first, I mean, I don't want to ignore the academic subject knowledge. I think that is ultimately K-12 schools or all colleges as well, that's what they're trained to provide and what they can provide. But for low-income minority students going to college, many of them would be first-generation students. So they don't know, what's it like financially. I don't mean the total bill that somehow they have managed to pay enough of to be let in, but what is going to be required of them financially, paying for food, paying for clothing, paying for things that are not, provided to a student is immensely, important. And a wealthy student has more people to help. I remember going to college in upstate New York with a student from Hawaii who did not arrive with a winter coat. But she got her parents to send her a winter coat. That is the kind of thing that seems very silly, but do people have the right clothing to succeed? And as well as the finance side of it, the stuff on personal interactions with people. Do they know how to talk to a student who's different from themselves? They're going to maybe interact with students who have a lot of money and who can do whatever they want. And that is a very frustrating experience, even if the low-income minority student has done nothing wrong. But I think high schools that focus on these areas more are having a big impact, and I hope that more high schools find a way to do so. Sarah?
Yeah, I would just add to that college counseling is really important, and so many high schools have college counselors that have maybe caseloads that don't allow them to go as in depth with students as they would like. There's just so much bureaucracy inherent in applying for college and applying for financial aid, and having sort of a guide through that process is really critical. And I'll take a look at some other questions that we have here. Someone asked, would it be safe to estimate that attendance may increase over the next 2 years as a result of the recession we may be entering? And I think that's a really interesting question. I am not an economist, but what I will say is I think we expected community college attendance to go up during the pandemic, or at least a lot of campus leaders did, because based on that sort of counter-cyclical thing that's worked for community colleges in the past. So I think it's hard to say. We might have been able to make a clear prediction back in 2008. We might have felt differently. I'm not sure what the answer is to that. And I also think we're in this interesting moment where we're entering a recession, but also there are these well-paying jobs for potential students to take. And I think that's taken a hit on community college enrollment as well.
Definitely, it has. Given the current environment of questioning the value of a college degree by communities and now elected officials, how can two schools secure more funding given the shift to less funding for community colleges? Are corporate partnerships a viable solution? Yes, they are a viable solution. Many corporations have extensive programs that provide resources that community colleges and four-year colleges desperately need. And they're in some circles, people may distrust corporate support, but I think at a community college and many four-year colleges, I don't think that's a viable solution because they need, they need money. The main thing that I would suggest, though, as well, is you making sure that the community college's needs are addressed to the legislature. You're talking about public institutions or the philanthropic world for private institutions. Community colleges, that statistic Sarah cited earlier of I think it was from a New America study, that the gap in the money available to a 2-year and 4-year institution was $8,800, I think. That is a huge gap. Now, community colleges obviously teach different things than four-year colleges. They pay their faculty members and administrators less money. They don't have as nice campuses with as many activities, et cetera, et cetera. But fundamentally, those are institutions that are trying to make a difference in our society, and they are working to make a difference. The other thing to remember, and I think really that you need to put pressure on your lawmakers to do more. A related thing is I again would reference the transfer rates. The transfer rates have been hurt by the pandemics and by the loss of enrollment. You've got to get a situation. And so if community colleges are being hurt in enrollment during the pandemic, so too are the four-year colleges. And it's going to be something that we're going to see in a few years when they don't have the students they want. So it is, it's not an easy answer, but I think corporate support will help, but only so far. You've got to get support from your community. Sarah?
Yeah, I would just add, even in sort of a moment of questioning the value of a college degree and community colleges, struggling with what it means to be under-resourced, community colleges are also having kind of a spotlight moment. I think state lawmakers are, increasingly aware that if they want to fill workforce shortages, they're going to have to invest in community colleges. I think industries that are trying to fill labor gaps are also looking to community colleges for help. So maybe in some ways it's sort of an opportune moment to make that plea. And another question we got here, it says, you briefly referred to the program to assist Black male college students. What is the focus on wraparound services to address some of the basic life issues that minority and rural students have to overcome? And I think during the pandemic, there's been a lot of focus on this issue in terms of expanding food pantries, creating new services to at least if a community college, for example, doesn't offer housing, at least find students housing or give them vouchers or find ways to make that sort of a more affordable option. So I really think there is attention being paid to that issue.
Definitely. How do you see career centers playing a role? What could they do to provide support to low-income and minority students? Well, career centers, you've got a range of issues. Some, first is, what do they have in terms of jobs? And are there jobs, we hear about jobs available to all students these days, but are they good jobs? Are they jobs that a student wants to get and that a student would go to a community college to learn, to learn how to be a whatever? I mean, career centers that want to just, create jobs, opportunities for a waiter or waitress, I'm not sure that that's really the greatest need. Career centers are also highly competitive with each other. At wealthy universities, you will have so many more things in the career center: staff, resources, many companies coming to recruit. At low income, at colleges that primarily serve low income and minority students, I don't think those exist in the same numbers. It's not that they're not welcome, they're just not there. And I'm not sure, frankly, how to change that. But I think it should change. Sarah?
I would just add that career advising is especially helpful to low income and minoritized students at a time when the return on investment of college is being questioned. I think a big part of that is not being able to see, how a college degree or credential, gets to a job that's well paying and desirable and interesting. And so career centers, have a big role to play in supporting these students and also, retaining them. Just looking through our many good questions here.
I may do another while you look. Does recording and posting the recording of all classes and posting all instructor class notes actually help the students, or is it more harmful to students' attention span, class participation, and class attendance? That all depends who you ask. There are some evidence that what people would fear is happening, that a student might be more likely to skip a class or not pay attention in class if they know that they can get access to the notes and materials afterwards. And certainly with some people that's true. But there's also evidence that recording helps students. Recording, particularly by professors who know that not all students learn in the same ways, and that some students may need more, repetition of the concept of being taught before they'll pick it up. And for those students, there is a great advantage to providing it. I suspect that many are going to provide it in the future for that reason. And yeah, they may have a few students skip class, but I think they may reach many more students who just need the extra time and attention. Sarah?
Yeah, and I think especially for adult learners who might have childcare responsibilities get in the way of attending class or work responsibilities, having the flexibility of recorded lectures is probably really helpful to keeping them on track, and might be sort of a beneficial sort of product of the pandemic for them, that this is more sort of readily available and readily accepted as a practice. And another question we got is, do you see dual enrollment programs, high school and college, as a viable solution to address college enrollment, graduation numbers, and technical skills and jobs? And I'll say something that is interesting is when a lot of times when I've talked to schools, and particularly community colleges that experience enrollment declines, it seems like dual enrollment is actually up. That's one of the populations that community colleges are successfully attracting, and I think are working to continue attracting to keep those enrollment numbers up. So I do think that dual enrollment can make a difference.
It's interesting with dual enrollment, it definitely is making a difference. And many community colleges report that large percentage of students are dually enrolled. But some of those colleges tell me privately that they're concerned that that's not the solution, the real solution to the community college enrollment crisis, and that community colleges need to serve many types of students, not just those who are also in high school. I've got time, I think, for one more. Was there a drop in African Americans in four-year colleges as well? It really depends which four-year college you are talking about. At four-year colleges that are prestigious, that have lots of applicants, this has been a great time to be an African American applying to college. There is at many institutions, test optional admissions has made the college more open than ever before. And they've got more students and they very much want those students. If you leave the colleges, if you leave that group of colleges though, many of the colleges are not in such good shape and are in fact losing Black students. And that is, terribly sad, because we need the low-income minority students in college, because we need them. And I hope that by doing some of the strategies we've outlined today, that colleges will succeed in getting some of those students back. And that's really our theme today, that you can make a difference for these students by doing the right things. And we wish you the best of luck. And we want to again thank T-Mobile for Education for sponsoring this webcast. Have a good day.